It's been well said, all things must come to an end. And so it is with working for the customer. But as our title of this section shows, Act 3, Concluding with Style, we want to finish the job properly. In this section, your instructor, Steve Tiburon, will help you discover the expectations of the customer and how to tactfully readjust them if their expectations are totally unreasonable. Steve will also share communication secrets and tips on showing courtesy to everyone you deal with on the home front. Then he'll also help you avoid the common trap of grabbing the money and running by performing the customer post-inspection. There's much to learn in this section, so listen carefully as Steve Tiburon discusses Act 3, Concluding with Style.
As you wait for Act 3 in your home front stage to start, you should feel really good about yourself. Let's examine what you've accomplished so far as you've worked in the customer's home. Not only have you done a great technical job, but you've also developed a close, caring, professional relationship with your client. In reality, you have become much more than just a worker. You are now a trusted consultant to your customer, and that's a wonderful place for you to be. In Act 1, the first 2 minutes, you made some wonderful first impressions by having a great attitude and good grooming, being on time, getting out of the truck promptly, giving the customer personal space at their front door, and then introducing yourself and your coworker professionally. You then broke the ice with the customer and carefully cleaned your shoes when the customer invited you in. So far, you're already ahead of the game just after Act 1. And then, in Act 2, getting the job done, your goal was to continue to deposit many, many more positive moments of truth into your customer's mental checking account. And you did this by asking the 2 magic questions in your customer interview. Number 1, please, Mrs. Jones, would you show me any areas of special concern? And then the second magic question, please, tell me, where would you like me to start? Now, both of these questions let you show an attitude of care and concern, and they gave your customer the illusion of control. And of course, every time you asked a question during this customer interview, you were very, very careful to listen to your customer's answer and to take immediate action based upon their response. And then in your second scene in Act 2, the demonstration scene, you finally started actually doing the work, but you also were very careful both to involve the customer and to educate them as to what makes a great job in your trade. In other words, in this demonstration scene, you were finally able to answer the last burning, unspoken question in your customer's mind, will this guy do a good job? And let me stress again here, before we start on Act 3, concluding with style, please, be sure to do good, quality, technical work. You see, these service engineering concepts that I'm sharing with you, they aren't designed to let you get away with sloppy, poor quality workmanship. Please don't let these positive moments of truth become shallow, manipulative schemes to control your customer. Instead, service engineering will get you the appreciation that you've always deserved for your good work. But you see, for this to be true, you need to deliver the quality first. You know what I've been reviewing with you for the last couple minutes? It all can be summed up in one word: communication. And if we as home front workers can just learn to communicate and build relationships with our customers, our jobs are going to be so much easier. You know, part of communicating with your customer is to learn what they expect from the job you're going to do. You know, that old saying is so true: clearly defined expectations are the basis for all successful business relationships. And we learned the expectations of our clients in Act 2, the interview scene. And why is this so important? Well, do you remember how we make customer cheerleaders? By dramatically exceeding the expectations of our customer. And you see, it's a whole lot easier to exceed your customer's expectations if you know what the results are that the customer expects from you. And after all, if the customer is expecting too much from this job, isn't it better to learn about it ahead of time before you do the work? Act 3, concluding with style. And I'm going to be giving you more positive moments of truth in such a way that you can finish the job, not just with style, but in such a way that you can make a cheerleader. And once again, every time I give you another idea or tip on how to make a positive moment of truth, or how to avoid a negative moment of truth, this tone will sound. Now remember here that you ignore your customer at your peril. It's just so easy for us to retreat, like a turtle into its shell. But if we do that, we're going to suffer later. We're going to pay a terrible price if we ignore the customer. Like the old saying goes, pay me now or pay me later. But almost as bad as being ignored, customers really hate it when you appear helpless or confused or unsure about the job or when they ask you something. Do you remember my illustration of the doctor that you're going to entrust your life to? Just imagine your emotional distress if the doctor says, well, I don't know what to do. What do you think I should do? Well, you'd be scared to death, and your customer is scared to death when you act unsure of yourself. So while I certainly don't want you to be cocky or to act arrogant in the customer's home, on the other hand, please, don't act unsure or confused about the job. After all, it certainly isn't going to help your customer feel good about you if they don't have confidence in you. And if your customer doesn't feel good about you, then they won't feel good about the job you've done. So as I always told my technicians, always act like you know what you're doing, even if you don't. Now, another important point is that when you communicate with the client, you need to remove some negative terms from your vocabulary. Here's some examples. I can't. I won't. I can't help you with that. I can't do that. The company doesn't allow this. Get rid of all these confrontational terms in your customer vocabulary. We never want to be confrontational with the homeowner. So try to never directly say no or I won't do that, I can't do that to a customer. But maybe you're thinking, wait a minute, Steve, wait a minute. You're saying I have to always do what the customer says. What if the customer asked me to strip myself naked, paint myself pink, and stand on my head in the middle of the freeway during rush hour? Do I still refuse to say no? Well, let me answer that by saying, first of all, I do realize that sometimes you're going to get apparently unreasonable requests out there. Sometimes customers can be totally off the wall in their expectations. So let me share with you now a 5-step sequence to follow when you run into a customer that you feel is unreasonable. Here we go. Number 1, be absolutely sure that you completely understand what the customer is asking for. How many times have you gone into a business and you've asked an employee for some little thing, and even before you were done talking, what's the sales clerk say? They blurt out, "Oh no, we can't do that." But then, after you very slowly and calmly and patiently repeated what you wanted, they said, "Oh, is that all? Of course we can do that." You see, remember that the vast majority of your customers are reasonable, nice people. So before you start to say no, hear out what your customer has to say. All too often we jump to conclusions and we overreact and we say no before we know the whole story. Well, here's how you get the whole story. Repeat the customer's request back to them, but phrase the request in the form of a clear question. For example, Mrs. Jones, when you say you want all the painting done by tonight, do you need just the inside of your house to be finished or the outside too? Now we're able to define exactly what Mrs. Jones wants. Then point number 2. Next, if the customer's expectations are still impossible to meet, try to find out why they need all of this done. Learn the reason behind their request, the background, so you can still resolve their concern, but just in a more reasonable manner. Well, how do you do this? Start out by using their name and reassuring them with yet another question. Mrs. Jones, I'm sure we can work this out, but may I ask you, why do you need the entire house painted by tonight? And incidentally, let me mention here that experts say when you call someone by their name, they're going to pay special attention to and take action on the next 5 words. So when you really want someone to pay attention, use their name at the start of the sentence. Now, here's the third point on how to deal with apparently unreasonable customer requests. Point number 3. Here's what you do next. I call it the horse trading step. You repeat back their answer as to why it needs to be done tonight, along with an alternative solution that's more reasonable. Here we go. Mrs. Jones, now I understand your concern. Obviously, you can't have the whole house messed up if you're having guests here tonight. But let me ask you, I'm assuming your company will mostly be in the living areas and the guest bathroom. Is that correct? Well, how about if I bring in extra crew and we work real hard on those areas and we have them perfect by tonight, and then tomorrow we'll do your bedrooms and the exterior of the house the day after that. Now, do you see what we've done so far with the first 3 steps of dealing with an apparently unreasonable customer? First, we made sure we truly understood the customer's request by repeating the question back to them in a more reasonable manner. And then, if the customer truly was being unreasonable, the second point, we tactfully found out why they made this request. And then point number 3 in our horse trading session, we suggested an alternative that would let them achieve their goal, but that we could work with also. But now, what happens if your horse trading doesn't work? The customer still is being totally unreasonable. Point number 4. Appeal to the customer's reason and then give her some reasonable options. And especially if you've been depositing positive moments of truth in the customer's mental checking account all along, this step will usually work. First, you review what you are going to do for her based on your new understanding of the problem. You can say something like this: Mrs. Jones, you know by now I'll do anything for you. I'll pull in extra people. We're all going to work late, but I have to be honest with you. We're not going to have the entire house done in time for your guests tonight. We'll do our very best, but you've got to tell me your priorities so we can concentrate on them first. Now, you see what you've done here? You've put the monkey on the customer's back as far as searching for a solution. And as they think about what they need done first, many times they'll become more cooperative. And then finally, if you sense you're getting in over your head with your customer, don't hesitate to get in touch with your office. Call them up for some backup and maybe some more ideas, and if the worst thing happens, they can talk to the customer. But try to do this without using the customer's phone. But if you do, what do? Well, before we use the customer's phone, we ask permission, and we always talk as if the customer is listening, because they probably are. And then let's review. Do you have in mind the 5-step sequence that you use with impractical, strange, or unreasonable requests from the homeowner? Here they are. Point number 1. Repeat back the customer's request in slightly more favorable terms. Many times the customer isn't clear in their request, or they don't really know what they want, and you truly can easily give it to them once you understand them. Case closed. So never say no to a client until you're absolutely sure that you truly understand what it is they're asking for. And then point number 2. Use the customer's name and ask them the reason for their need. And here you're trying to find out exactly why they feel they need all these things done. Point number 3. With your new understanding of the customer's priorities, you're going to be able to do some horse trading with the customer. You're going to suggest an alternate way of accomplishing their goals, but in a way that you can work with also. And this step almost always succeeds, especially if you've built up a large credit balance in the customer's mental checking account, because the homeowner here is going to see that you're sincerely trying to work with them. Point number 4, if you can't get their approval, explain the situation, list out what you can do and what it is possible to do, and appeal to their reason. How do you do this? You put the ball in their court, give your customer their options, and then ask them to choose. I call this step putting it on the customer's back. And then finally, point number 5, know when to bail out. And with a few totally unreasonable customers, you're going to need to call the office and dump the whole mess over to your supervisor or to the manager. But before you call your office, explain to the client why you're doing so, not because you're scared, but because you want to call the office and see if they have some extra ideas. But in reality, what you really want to do is get some backup and maybe get some help from your management. Now, do you see the goal that we've accomplished with this 5-step solution on how to handle an unreasonable client? These 5 steps have given you an organized way to show an attitude of care and concern. And I promise you, you'll be amazed at how cooperative 99.99% of your customers will be if you display an attitude of care and concern. Now that we've reviewed how to deal with unreasonable requests from customers, let's work on our language. Now, I'm not talking here about 4-letter words and dirty jokes. You already know never to use dirty language or obscene jesting in the customer's home. But instead, let me share with you some principles on the words that we should try to use with the homeowner. First of all, try to avoid using technical words unless you immediately give a simple definition or use an illustration to explain what you're talking about. You know, some technical words and phrases, if you carefully explain them, can give you credibility. They can show that you know what you're talking about, that you're an expert. But don't use them without explaining what these technical words are, so you don't leave the customer in the dark. That's just a really negative moment of truth when the customer has to say, wait a minute, I don't understand what you're saying. And then our second point on our language, be very careful how you phrase things in the customer's home. You remember that already in this course, we've learned that customers are in love with their homes. Their hearts are attached to their homes. You remember earlier in this course how we talked about a heart surgeon? Now, when this heart surgeon discusses the case with his patient, is he going to say, well, first of all, we're going to whack open your chest? I don't think so. Kind of makes you hurt, doesn't it? Do you see how much more sensitive it would be of this heart surgeon to say, first of all, we'll make a careful incision. Same thing. In both cases, he's going to whack open your chest, but doesn't a careful incision sound better than whacking you open? Of course. Well, in the same way, we need to phrase our descriptive actions carefully in the customer's home. So instead of saying, we're going to rip up your carpet, why not say, well, first of all, Mrs. Jones, we will carefully disengage your carpet from the tackless strip that holds it to the wall. Same action. Both ways you're going to rip up that carpet, but a different terminology and a better moment of truth. For example, in my Homefront business, after we'd cleaned the carpets, they were never wet, they were damp. Or when I was discussing a remodeling job with the client, we weren't going to gut the living room. Think about that. You know, we're going to gut your living room. No, instead I would say, Mrs. Jones, we will remove the existing drywall, the insulation, and the finished trim. Now, do you see the moment of truth here? When I was precise in my language, the customer assumed I would also be precise in my work, and I avoided the negative moment of truth of saying, I'm going to gut your living room. Let me give you a final example here on terminology. At one time in my career, I moonlighted as an auctioneer. And just like you, auctioneers work with people's possessions, and they have learned to be very, very tactful. For example, when I looked around a lifetime of work that we were going to dispose of at auction, I could have said to my customer, "Yeah, we can get rid of this junk for you." But wait a minute, this was somebody's life. What do you think would have happened if I'd said, "We can get rid of this junk for you"? I would have been out of a job. Now, I also could have used the term items. For example, yes, we can dispose of these items, but the word items is a very impersonal word. So, what did I do? I always made a positive moment of truth by saying, "Yes, Mrs. Jones, I believe that we can take good care of your possessions." Do you see how much sweeter the term possessions is than the words junk or items? And finally, on this subject of language and being careful with how we use it, on a humorous note, have you ever been on an airplane and maybe the pilot comes on the intercom and says, "We're on our final approach"? Think about that. Final approach. That doesn't really make you feel confident of what's going to happen next. So do you see the power of language when we're making moments of truth? Now, are all these things just nitpicky details? Yes, they are. They are details, but they're not nitpicky. Remember that details are what count in making moments of truth, and moments of truth are what count in making cheerleaders. Now, another area of language that is so important is the words and the actions that our parents taught us. We call them good manners. Now, I call them uncommon courtesy. And because, sadly, courtesy isn't too common anymore in the world we live in. It's an ill-mannered, rude, nasty world out there, isn't it? You know, all we see and hear is bad manners. Bad manners on TV, bad manners on the movies, on the freeway, and yes, sometimes, sadly, our customers all show bad manners too. So it's really easy to forget the little details of showing courtesy with our language. It's easy to forget to use words like please, thank you, you're welcome, I appreciate it. Never, ever let your need for speed and efficiency crowd out these courteous, small details in your language. They're so, so important. They mean so much when it comes to making cheerleaders. After all, do you remember how we make a cheerleader? That's right, by dramatically exceeding the expectations of your customer. And much of the time, your customers have come to expect bad manners from the people who come to work in their homes. So it's going to be so easy for you to shine if you show uncommon courtesy. But remember, too, that we need to show good manners to everyone that we meet during the day, not just our customers. Here's a rule for you to live by on the home front. Everyone gets treated with respect and dignity. Now, why is this so important? I've got several reasons for you. First of all, if you are constantly analyzing as you work your way through your day, do I need to be nice to this person? It's going to make an emotional yo-yo out of you. And that's just really stressful and tiring. And secondly, you never know. You never know who this person is. Even if this person appears that they will never be able to afford your services in their home and you encounter them somewhere in your day, you never know. She might be the maid in $1 million home and in charge of scheduling the type of work that you do. Or she might have friends that ask her for a recommendation, or a boss that needs work done in his home, or relatives that own nice houses. You just never know. And then here's a third reason to treat everybody with respect and dignity. Remember, if you are on company time, or if you're wearing a company uniform, even when you're not on the clock, you are representing the company. And as I keep repeating, in a very real sense, you are the company. You are the moment of truth. And finally, the last reason why everybody gets treated with respect and dignity, it's the right thing to do. And you see, when we treat other people badly, when we treat other people without respect, maybe it might make us feel better for a short time. But you know, in the long term, it always comes back and bites us. So please, always display uncommon courtesy all the time to everybody you meet. Now, when I say everyone gets treated with respect and dignity, that's just what I mean, including your coworkers. When we work with people day in and day out, they become like our family. And families, well, sometimes they have spats. Families fight. Or maybe sometimes you just flat don't like a fellow employee. See, that's unfortunate, but sometimes that happens. But if there are bad feelings between you and another employee, never, ever let it come out in front of the customer or in the customer's home. You see, remember, the customer is always listening, and it's a huge negative or positive moment of truth how we treat each other as we work in the customer's home. Let me illustrate this point with an actual letter that we received from a customer. Our company had restored this customer's home after she suffered a fire, so we had many employees in her home working for a period of several weeks. At the end of the job, she sent me a letter that said in part, "We wanted to tell you how much we enjoyed having your crew, Lori, Rebecca, Denise, and Chad, in our home. As I sat at my desk working, I could hear them visiting and bantering back and forth as they worked. They enjoyed each other and their work, and it made for a very comfortable feeling. They are good people." Now, isn't it interesting how this person became a cheerleader? Now, of course, we did a good job in her home. But did you notice something in her letter? She didn't even mention the technical side of our work. She didn't talk about all of our fancy equipment or our tools. What did she talk about? Our people, and especially how they treated each other in her home. Now, what would have happened if we'd done an equally good job, if we'd still treated our client with care and concern, but if we'd snarled and fought among ourselves and bickered like little children as we worked in the customer's home? Now, she still would have been satisfied with the job. It was a good job, but it would have been a baseline transaction. She would have paid us our money, we would have gone on our way, but the woman never would have become a cheerleader. You see, this client picked as her defining moment of truth, well, it's real simple, how our employees treated each other in her home. Now, of course, remember that you're on a stage in the customer's home, not only in how you treat your fellow workers, but also how you perform the work. For example, almost all of the work that my company did was pre-priced. You see, it didn't matter financially to the customer if we took 2 hours to do the job or if we took all day. She was going to pay the same. And yet, one of the most frequent comments we received was how hard our employees worked, how they worked as a team, how efficient they were, and how much pride they showed in their work. You see, customers love to see you work hard, and maybe that's because hard work is so rare today. Now remember here, I'm not saying to run into the customer's home or give the impression you're just banging out the job. There is a huge difference between efficiency and running through a job. So examine how you deliver the work you do. Do you kind of shamble along listlessly and slowly thinking, "Oh man, the sooner I get there, the sooner I'll have to go to work"? Or do you walk and work with pride, quickly, efficiently, and happily? You see, all of these things are powerful, positive moments of truth. So, what have we learned so far about cleaning up our language? Number 1, never use dirty words or tell off-color jokes in the customer's home. Always talk among your coworkers as if the customer is standing right beside you. Point number 2, if you use a technical word or phrase, immediately explain it to the customer. Point number 3, use kind, gentle words with tact in the customer's residence because people are in love with their homes. And also try to give precise workmanlike descriptions, and then customers are going to assume that you're going to do that same precise work. Point number 4, always show good manners in your conduct and your speech whenever you have on your company uniform, even if you're off the clock. Because even a little act of uncommon courtesy can be a powerful moment of truth. Point number 5. Remember to always treat everyone with respect and dignity, even people that you think will never need your services in 1,000 years. They still get treated right. And then point number 6. If you have bad feelings with a fellow employee, never show it to the customer as you work in their home. Treat each other with respect and dignity all the time. And then point number 7. Work hard. Just work hard, not running and rushing through the job, but customers appreciate it so much when we work hard and efficiently in their home. So here you are in your stage play. You've completed Act 1, the first 2 minutes, and Act 2, getting the job done. You're raring to go. You've completed the job. Is it time to grab the money and run out of the house as fast as you can? I don't think so. You see, your first scene now in Act 3, concluding with style, is the customer post-inspection. You'll remember that I told you earlier, don't lie to yourself. Well, if you think that the customer isn't going to go over your work with a fine-tooth comb the second after you leave, you're fooling yourself. Trust me, the minute you're out the door, they're going to be checking out the work you did in their house. They're going to be inspecting your work. Now, all this post-inspection scene does is to give you the chance to be involved in the inspection that the customer is going to make the second you leave the house. And it gives you the chance to guide the outcome of this inspection. Now, this post-inspection scene also is going to let you show the all-important attitude of care and concern, and it will let you anticipate and point out any areas that the customer may have a problem with. You know, this is a much, much better approach than just driving away from the home, hoping against hope that your customer doesn't notice something where you've made a boo-boo. Now, the post-inspection scene is also where you qualify the job. And you're going to point out the places that look great and the places that don't look as great. You're going to explain what you've done and, if necessary, why the job can't be made any better. And if more work is required, you can discuss the additional cost and what more you can do. So in other words, in the post-inspection scene, you're covering your rear end. Now, part of covering your rear end is to point out with concern any pre-existing damage that you've discovered. You know, on the Homefront, we have an old saying, if the customer discovers the problem and points it out to you, it's your problem. On the other hand, if you discover the problem and point it out to the client, it's their problem. And wouldn't you rather any pre-existing damage be the customer's problem instead of your problem? Now, this principle also applies to work that you just can't make perfect. You see, if you point it out with concern, you can also explain the reason for this little problem area and suggest some options to the customer. But if the customer, or even worse, the spouse of the customer, discovers this bad area, you're not going to be there to defend yourself. And even worse, in the customer's eyes, they're going to think that you tried to sneak something by them. And then what happens? Well, you know, out comes that old magnifying glass, and everything just sort of goes downhill from there. So when I think of the post-inspection scene, I'm reminded of that old saying, expect the best, but prepare for the worst. You hope the customer will be happy. They should be happy if you've done everything that we've been talking about in the Homefront service script. But you're also getting out in the open any possible problem areas so you can be prepared to deal with them. Now, here's some sample scripts that you can use in your post-inspection. I call this technique the concerned suggestion. Mrs. Jones, do you have a minute? I'd like to review with you what I've done. Everything came out real well, but I'm concerned about this corner. I've tried several techniques, but for it to be 100% perfect, We're just going to have to move up the ladder in terms of what we can do, and that's going to cost an extra. So you get the idea what we're doing here. Or here's a sample of what I call covering your rear. Mrs. Jones, I noticed as I was walking by your sofa that it had a small tear here. You might want to get it taken care of before it gets worse. Now, if you don't perform the post-inspection scene with the customer and cover your rear, here's what's going to happen. You're going to suffer from the customer's case of heightened awareness syndrome. Now, all of us really suffer from this after we've had someone working in their home. You see, if you're like me, probably things are wrong with your home and with your furnishings, but they've sort of blended into the landscape. You know what I mean. Maybe your sofa got torn 5 or 6 years ago and you always thought, I'm going to get that fixed someday. And the years slid by, and by now you've forgotten that there's even a problem with it. Or maybe your drywall is chipped, or the carpet is loose, or the floor is scratched. The point is, you don't really notice any of these things. They're just part of the landscape of your life. But what happens immediately after someone leaves your home and they've been working in it? You're hit with heightened awareness syndrome. You're worried. Why? Because somebody's been in your castle. So what do? You start snooping around and you're checking things out. And all of a sudden you say, well, look here. He tore my sofa and he chipped my drywall. And you honestly believe this. So my point here is obvious. Avoid getting caught up in your customer's heightened awareness syndrome by tactfully showing them pre-existing problems. Now, in the last part of your post-inspection scene, I want you to spend a few minutes with the customer giving them some tips and hints on maintaining what you've been working on. Don't just grab the money and run here. Instead, I want you to function as a consultant. And this is a wonderful opportunity for you to display an attitude of care and concern and shows the customer that you really do want to build a long-term relationship with them. So your post-inspection scene is very simple. You have 3 sections in this scene. First, you qualify any of your work that isn't 100% perfect, and you explain why, along with giving the customer the option of doing more if they want to. Second, you cover yourself against the dreaded heightened awareness syndrome of the customer by giving them concerned suggestions about problems you've noticed in their home. And then finally, you spend a few minutes with your customer as a consultant, giving them some tips and ideas on maintaining what you've been working on. Now, after you complete the customer post-inspection, it's time to start the final scene of this beautiful stage play you've produced in the customer's home. And this is what I call the thank you scene. Now, also, don't forget you're going to do something else that's very, very important in this scene. You're going to get paid, or at least you're going to leave a bill so you can get paid later. Because, see, if you don't get paid, or at least lay the groundwork to get paid, maybe your company's not going to be able to pay you, and my guess is you think that's pretty important. Now, the easy way to look at asking to be paid is to just ask. For example, so Mrs. Jones, I want to be paid now. Or, Mrs. Jones, can you afford to pay this? Well, you see the problem with this? These questions are very confrontational and they're awkward. And we never want to come across as pushy in service engineering. But, on the other hand, you don't want to be shy or timid either. After all, you've done a great job. Why shouldn't you be paid? And especially if you've followed the service script that I've been sharing with you, your customer is delighted. She's a cheerleader. She expects to pay you. She wants to pay you. Because why? You have dramatically exceeded her expectations. So don't be ashamed to lay the groundwork to get paid. Now, depending on what your office has arranged with this customer, they're either going to sign an invoice and they'll be billed, or you're going to pick up the payment right now that you're done. So if you expect to be paid now, a good way to ask is, do you have a check number for me to write on your invoice? Now, with your customer's eyeglasses on, can you see how much better it is to say, do you have a check number for me, than to say, "You got to pay me now, lady." Do you see the point there? It's just much more tactful and sweet to the customer's ears. Now, normally, customers expect to pay at the completion of the job. But you know, they might have one more unspoken question shouting away in their mind. And you know what that is? Is this guy just being nice to me to get the money, and then he's going to cut and run? Well, you've worked so hard in this stage play. You've worked so hard on building a relationship with the customer. Don't let this last unspoken question go unanswered. Take a few minutes now that you've received the money, you've given them the bill. Now, go ahead and cement your long-term relationship with the customer. So if you haven't done it earlier, take a few seconds here to function as a maintenance consultant on what you've worked on. Or maybe point out another area of their home and give them a suggestion on how to take care of it. Remember, by now, the customer views you as an expert, and they're going to really appreciate your consulting with them on their home. Now, this is just a great chance to reinforce this same old attitude of care and concern that you want to show to your customer. So what have you done so far? You've done the job right, and you've been paid. But more importantly, you've delivered the job around the emotions of the homeowner, and you've made a customer cheerleader. And now you have the crowning conclusion of the thank you scene. Here's what you say. "Mrs. Jones, I've really enjoyed meeting you. We appreciate your business. Thank you. Goodbye." Now, you know, I am continually amazed out there at the number of Homefront technicians, people who work in the customers' homes, that do not or will not say, "Thank you." Now, I'm sure that you realize the customer is responsible ultimately for your paycheck. So why not say thank you? Don't be afraid to appreciate people, to thank them in a sincere manner. When was the last time a Homefront worker, or anyone else for that matter, told you they enjoyed meeting you and they appreciated your business? You're right. They didn't enjoy meeting you. They didn't enjoy their day. They probably hate their job and they don't enjoy their life. And you know why? Because they haven't bought into these service engineering concepts that I've been sharing with you. But you, when you tell your customer, "I've enjoyed meeting you," you really have. And when you say, "We appreciate your business," you really mean it, because you're confident now that your customer will become a cheerleader. And you know just how important a cheerleader is, both to your company and to your personal future.